Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what I honestly think is one of the most mind-blowing phenomena in all of human history. We're going back to the Americas before 1450. This is way before any contact with Afro-Eurasia. And what we're looking at are two incredible, completely independent demonstrations of human capability, the Aztec and Inca empires. These folks managed to engineer massive, thriving societies, and they did it totally isolated from the rest of the globe. It's just a stunning testament to parallel genius, and honestly, it completely rewrites how we understand the human drive to build, organize, and thrive.
Okay, let's dive into this. For the longest time, history has kind of looked down on the Aztec and Inca empires by focusing on what they supposedly lacked. You know the arguments: they didn't have iron metallurgy, they didn't use the wheel for transportation, no huge domesticated draft animals to pull things, and no alphabetic writing. But asking how they built empires without these tools confronts a massive Eurocentric myth, this ridiculous idea that societies without these specific technologies were somehow primitive. As you'll see, when we actually unpack this history, it completely inverts that lesson.
First off, we've got to bust a really persistent myth. The Americas in 1200 were absolutely not some vast, untouched wilderness just sitting around waiting to be discovered. No way. On the contrary, this landscape was heavily developed. We're talking about millions of people living in highly complex states and empires. They were building absolutely massive monumental architecture, they had standing armies, they ran complex taxation systems, and they successfully passed down deep generations of knowledge.
Section 1. The Mexica. Engineering an Empire. Let's head straight to the Valley of Mexico to check out our first civilizational cluster, which most of us know today as the Aztec civilization. Let's move to and see how this builds over time. The Mexica originally described themselves as wanderers from a northern homeland called Aztlan. Now, guided by their patron deity Huitzilopochtli, they arrive in the Valley of Mexico in the early 14th century. And in 1325, they do something completely audacious. They found their city, Tenochtitlan, right smack in the middle of a swampy island in Lake Texcoco. And get this, within just 150 years, they engineered that seriously challenging muddy settlement into a booming monumental metropolis.
300,000. By the late 1400s, Tenochtitlan was home to roughly 300,000 inhabitants. To really wrap your head around that scale, that made it one of the largest cities in the entire world. It was significantly larger than any contemporary European capital at the time, literally dwarfing them. But that raises a huge question. How on earth do you feed 300,000 people when your entire city is floating on a swampy island? Well, the answer lies in this really crucial piece of vocabulary, the chinampa. You'll often hear these called floating gardens, though to be fair, they were actually firmly anchored in place. By creating these raised, incredibly fertile platforms right there in the shallow lakes, Mexica farmers essentially manufactured brand new, prime agricultural real estate out of thin air, or, well, out of mud. These chinampas were so productive they were yielding multiple harvests a single year. That's what created the massive food surplus needed to feed the city's huge population of artisans, warriors, priests, and administrators. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer engineering genius required to pull this off without any modern machinery. It's wild. First, they actually dredged mud and decaying vegetation straight from the lake bottom. Second, they layered all that with a rich soil topping to build up a platform above the waterline. And third, and this is the real kicker, they planted willow trees all around the borders. They used the deep, fast-growing roots of those trees to physically anchor the entire artificial island securely deep into the lake bed. They quite literally engineered their own abundance.
But, agriculture alone didn't hold the whole Aztec state together. The tribute economy did. The Triple Alliance, which was made up of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, dominated an area of roughly 200,000 square kilometers. That is a subject population of 5 to 6 million people. And from those conquered peoples flowed an absolutely staggering amount of material wealth. If you look at colonial-era records like the Codex Menzoda, you'll see conquered lords had to reliably send cotton, textiles, food staples, jade, brilliant feathers, and cacao. And cacao was so incredibly valuable, it literally functioned as money. Imagine paying your taxes in chocolate.
But we really need to understand why they expanded with such intense ferocity. For the Aztecs, the tribute system wasn't just about grabbing wealth. It was intensely, deeply religious. In their cosmology, the actual movement of the sun and the very survival of the universe itself required regular offerings of human blood. Without it, they genuinely believed a complete cosmic collapse was right around the corner.
And this brings us to the Flower Wars, or Guerras Floridas. These were highly ritualized conflicts fought specifically to obtain captives for sacrifice. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that this wasn't just some cynical political cover-up to excuse violence. The Mexica rulers, priests, and warriors operated within a very real world where warfare had a double, undeniable justification. On one hand, it brought in the tribute needed to physically keep the state running, and on the other, it provided the captives required to spiritually keep the entire cosmos alive.
Section 2. The Inca, the engine of reciprocity. All right, now we're going to pivot thousands of miles south, deep into the formidable Andes Mountains, to introduce our second major civilizational cluster, Tawantinsuyu, the mighty Inca Empire.
A staggering 4,000 kilometers. By 1450, the Inca had achieved what was arguably the largest, most extensive territorial state in all of the Americas. It stretched roughly 4,000 kilometers down the western coast of South America, going from modern-day Ecuador all the way down to Chile. We are talking about spanning bone-dry desert coasts, breathtakingly high mountain plateaus, and incredibly dense tropical jungles.
So to manage an empire of this massive scale, and remember, they're doing this without iron, without wheels, and without alphabetic writing, the Inca relied on an absolute organizational powerhouse called the mita. This was a labor tax system, so instead of owing money, subject communities owed the state a fixed period of their physical labor every single year. It was actually this mita labor that constructed massive mortarless stone wonders like Machu Picchu and the huge temple complex down in Cusco. And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference in how the Inca operated compared to the Aztecs. The mita wasn't just a one-way street of brutal extraction. It was an intricate, highly managed web of reciprocal exchange. While subjects provided the heavy labor for building roads, temples, and serving in the military, the Inca state provided food, clothing, and the tools they needed during that exact labor period. Even more importantly, the state stored massive quantities of surplus goods in warehouses all across the empire. This created a literal safety net for famine and drought. That reciprocal logic, that's exactly what gave the Inca Empire its popular legitimacy. The sheer result of all this highly organized labor was an engineering marvel. Over 40,000 kilometers of interconnected roads. Picture this for a second. Navigating some of the absolute most difficult terrain on Earth. The Inca used that mita labor to build giant suspension bridges made entirely out of twisted plant fibers, successfully spanning these deadly, dizzying Andean gorges. Honestly, contemporary European engineers would have seriously struggled to cross these gaps, and the Inca were just doing it with grass and woven fiber. And zipping along these sprawling mountain highways were the chasquis. These were highly trained relay runners, and they were a true logistical miracle. Because of this insane road network, a runner could transport fresh fish from the Pacific Ocean all the way up into the towering highland capital of Cusco before it even thought about spoiling. I mean, that's just wild. These roads were the literal arteries of the empire. They constantly moved armies, goods, and officials, serving as both a highly practical tool and a massive symbolic flex of Inca dominance. So how exactly did they keep track of 40,000 kilometers of roads, massive overflowing warehouses, and millions of subjects? Without an alphabet? Well, they used the quipu. These were intricate systems of knotted strings of varying colors, sizes, and arrangements. Highly trained specialists could read these knots to track numerical data, accounting, tribute records, census figures, and potentially even highly complex narrative information. It's absolute proof, right there, that advanced data storage does not require written letters. It's like a giant puzzle they completely mastered.
Section 3. Power without the wheel. A comparison. Okay, we've arrived at the comparative climax of our explainer. We've got two incredibly powerful, totally isolated empires that managed to solve the massive problem of statecraft, but they did it in entirely different ways.
So the crucial point is this contrast right here. On the Aztec side, their power was built on the extraction of physical wealth and goods through a really fierce tribute system. It was perfectly designed to continuously fuel that massive urban core of Tenochtitlan. On the flip side, the Inca built their power on the extraction of human labor through the mita, but they balanced it with a reciprocal safety net of state-provided goods and massive famine relief. These are two radically different methods of controlling subject peoples, yet both were wildly successful in their respective, very challenging environments.
And this brings us right back to the core thesis of this explainer. It is such a massive mistake to frame these empires by what they lacked, whether that's the wheel, iron, or an alphabet. Instead, look at their ingenious adaptations. Conquering swamps and treacherous mountain ranges. These are absolute testaments to human capability. They built administrative, military, and economic systems of mind-blowing sophistication using exactly the resources they had on hand. Complex state building is a universal human capacity, not just something exported from a single civilization. It really challenges us to rethink our modern assumptions about what actually makes a society civilized or advanced.
I'll leave you with this final, genuinely provocative thought. When the Spanish colonial government arrived, they immediately recognized the subversive power of the Inca Quipu readers, the Quipu Kamayaks, and they tragically, systematically suppressed their knowledge. The ability to fully read those knotted strings essentially died out. It really makes you wonder, with the sudden violent clash of colonialism, what other vast, incredible reservoirs of human knowledge and parallel genius have been forever lost to history? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep exploring.